Alexander the Great, the young king of Macedon who conquered most of the known world before turning 30, is one of those figures that seem to have been plucked straight out of mythology rather than history. His name conjures images of epic battles, cities in flames, and a leader who never knew defeat. But what truly sets him apart is not just his military genius alone, but his ability to inspire his men, his limitless ambition and his vision for a unified world under one single culture. How did a young man who inherited a small kingdom manage to create one of the greatest empires in ancient history? What drove him to keep advancing when any other would have stopped to enjoy his glory? To understand Alexander, it's not enough to look at his conquests, you have to delve into his mind, his dreams, and the decisions that made him a legend. Since childhood, Alejandro was destined for greatness. Son of Philip II, a king who transformed Macedonia into a military power, and from Olympia, an ambitious woman who convinced him that he descended from the gods, grew up with the certainty that his destiny was not to rule over one kingdom, but something far greater. Aristotle educated her, instilling a love for philosophy, science, and Greek culture, but also taught her that true greatness lies not in physical strength, but in knowledge. However, Alejandro was not just a brilliant student. From a young age he showed an indomitable character and an audacity that made him stand out among his peers. It is said that by the time he was just 16, he was already commanding armies and making life-or-death decisions on the battlefield. Her rise story is almost cinematic. When his father was murdered, Alejandro, just 20 years old, took the throne at a time when his kingdom was surrounded by enemies. Any other young man in his situation would have tried to consolidate his power with caution, but Alejandro was unlike the others. In a matter of months, he crushed internal rebellions, defeated his rivals and secured his dominance over Greece. That wasn't enough. Since childhood, I had heard stories of the war between Greeks and Persians, and now he saw his chance, not only to avenge the invasions of Xerxes and Darius, but to conquer the greatest empire in the world. The Persian campaign was his definitive proof of military genius. With a small but unbeatable army, he crossed the Bosphorus and began a series of victories that thoroughly disoriented his enemies. In the Battle of Granicus, his bravery was so impressive that even his own soldiers thought he was invincible. In Issos, Darius III was defeated by the king despite being in clear disadvantage. But it was at Gaugamela where he proved not only to be a formidable warrior, but an unequal strategist. With a carefully calculated move, he broke through the Persian lines and forced Dario to flee, sealing his fate as king of Asia. But Alejandro was more than just a conqueror. As he advanced, he didn't just destroy, he also built. He founded more than 70 cities, among them the most famous was Alexandria in Egypt, which became a center of knowledge that lasted for centuries. He tried to assimilate the cultures by adopting Persian clothing and customs, marrying his generals with Asian women and promoting the integration of his new subjects into his army and administration. This vision of a unified empire was not understood by many of his own men, who accused him of forgetting his Greek roots, but Alexander did not seek to be just a Macedonian king, he wanted to be a universal sovereign. However, her ambition knew no bounds. When any other would have returned home to enjoy their victory, he kept moving forward. He crossed the Hindu Kush, challenged war elephants in India, and, in the Battle of the Hydaspes, achieved what seemed impossible, to defeat an enemy that surpassed him both in numbers and strength. But his army, exhausted after years of campaigns, refused to continue advancing. Alejandro, though furious but aware of reality, agreed to return, although he didn't do it without first building a fleet and exploring the unknown Indian Ocean. His return was not easy. He traversed the desert of Jedrosia, where he lost thousands of his men to hunger and heat. In Babylon, he began to plot new conquests, dreaming of Arabia and beyond, but death surprised him before he could carry out his next campaign. At 32, Alexander the Great, the man who had never been defeated, fell victim to a mysterious fever. Her death left a void that no one else could fill. His empire was divided among his generals, and although his kingdom disappeared, his legacy endured. What makes Alejandro fascinating is not only his military success but rather his spirit. He was not just a conqueror, but a visionary who believed in the fusion of cultures, in the expansion of knowledge and the possibility of a world beyond the boundaries imposed by men. His legacy influenced Rome, the Renaissance, and our understanding of history itself. His story is that of someone who refused to accept boundaries, saw the impossible as a mere obstacle to overcome, and with every battle and decision, wrote their name in eternity.